The Resonance Matrix, Episode 2, The Architecture of Silence and Environmental Linguistics. Hello, and welcome to the Resonance Matrix, a mirror linguistic hypothesis series. I'm James Miller. In our first journey, we stood in the center of the square. We felt the pulse of the crowd, and saw how thousands of individual nervous systems can be entrained into a single, undulating wave of shared physiology. We learned that we are nodes in an invisible architecture of resonance. But the matrix is not only composed of people. It is held by the very walls we inhabit. Today, we are shifting our lens from the acoustic coherence of the many to the architecture of silence. We are stepping into the rooms where your body has learned to behave, to shrink, to pray, or to vanish, long before a single word was ever spoken to you. The environmental mirror, I want you to pause where you are. Look around the room you are currently in. Notice the height of the ceiling. Notice the material of the walls. Is it soft and absorbent or hard and reflective? Notice the light. Before you even name the objects in this space, your vagal antenna has already performed a field observation. It has calculated the prosody of the space. Every building is a fossilized intention. Every hospital corridor, every courtroom bench, and every cathedral spire was designed to elicit a specific autonomic response. They carry a tonal residue, a silent physiological frequency left behind by the histories and the scripts of those who built them. The threshold of the room. We often think of silence as a void, a space between words. But in the mirror linguistic hypothesis, silence is never empty. It is a language all its own. It is the threshold where the environment begins to speak directly to your brainstem. Why does your breath become shallow when you walk into a courtroom? Why does your heart rate find a different rhythm in a forest than it does in a shopping mall? In this episode, we are going to decode environmental linguistics. We are going to explore how physical spaces function as silent nervous system language, NSL scripts. We will learn that a room doesn't just contain you, it re-scripts you. It tells your body what its first word should be in that specific field. Take a slow breath in. As you exhale, imagine the sound of your breath traveling to the corners of the room. Feel the boundaries of the space you are in. Acknowledge that you are not just in this room. You are in a somatic conversation with it. We are moving from the roar to the whisper. We are moving from the crowd to the corridor. Let's step back into the matrix. 2. The quintessential mirror, the environment as the static caregiver. To understand the architecture of silence, we must first return to the bedrock. In our previous exploration of the pulse of the crowd, we re-established the foundational pillars of the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH. We reminded ourselves that meaning is not a cognitive achievement, but a physiological event. We acknowledged that we are resonators before we are thinkers. But in the dyadic work of mirror talk, the mirror was always another person, a caregiver, a partner, or a stranger. Today we widen that lens further. We acknowledge that the environment itself is a static caregiver. Before a person ever speaks to you, the room has already mirrored a state into your body. The environmental symbolic fallacy. For a century, we have lived under the symbolic fallacy in linguistics. We were taught that language is an arbitrary pairing of signifiers and signifieds, that the word dog has no intrinsic connection to the creature. We have applied this same detached logic to our architecture. We are taught that a building is merely a collection of arbitrary materials, stone, wood, glass, paired with a signified function like hospital or courtroom. We view these spaces as neutral containers. But the MLH proposes that this symbolic view is incomplete. It ignores the body. It ignores the fact that when you walk into a space, the building is not sending you a code to be decoded. It is sending you a signal to be mirrored. If meaning is mirrored in physiology, then the meaning of a room is the autonomic state it forces upon you. You do not understand a courtroom by reading its name on the door. You understand it when your heart rate spikes and your jaw tightens as you cross the threshold. The architecture is the prosody of the void. Pillar 1. Spaces as carriers of charge. The second fundamental of the MLH is that words are not inert signs. They are carriers of physiological charge. In the resonance matrix, we recognize that spaces are the same. A room is a biological battery. Think of a word like stop. In a dictionary, it is a simple command, but in the body, it is a somatic marker inherited from a scene of correction. Now think of a hospital corridor. For many, a hospital corridor is not a neutral hallway. It is a space that carries an inherited tonal charge. It is a place where hushes are not soft but sharp signals of clinical freeze. Your body reacts to the sterile smell and the fluorescent pitch of the lights as if it were back in a moment of life threat or helplessness. The meaning of the space for your nervous system is not healing, but danger. We do not just learn the purpose of buildings, we inherit a somatic lexicon of space. We learn the feel of institutions through cultural reinforcement and collective experience. Pillar 2. The prosody of geometry. This brings us to the third quintessential pillar. Prosody is the primary signal. In language, prosody is the music, the rhythm, the pitch, the melody. In architecture, prosody is the geometry. High vaulted ceilings in a cathedral are not just aesthetic choices, they are prosodic invitations. They mimic the prosody of safety and expansion. They pull your gaze upward, widening your ribs and encouraging a slow, deep inhale. Long before you hear a sermon, the cathedral has used its acoustic coherence to entrain you into a state of spiritual entrainment. Conversely, the institutional dialect of a low-ceilinged basement office or a cramped cubicle uses tonal flattening. It tells your nervous system, do not expand. Stay small, you are a concept, not a body. This is somatic misattunement written in drywall. The space bypasses your cognitive decoding and speaks directly to your vagus nerve. Pillar 3. Regulation as environmental fluency. In the MLH, true fluency is regulation. In the context of the matrix, being fluent in a space means achieving acoustic coherence with the environment without losing your own truth. Traditionally, we measure our success in a space by how well we obey its rules. But in the resonance matrix, fluency is the alignment between your internal state and the environmental prosody. When you enter a room that is heavy with a collective freeze, like a courtroom, the room is attempting to edit your grammar. It wants your voice to be flat and your syntax to be embodied with compliance. To be fluent is to remain congruent. It is to speak from a body that is home to itself, even when the architecture is trying to evict you. Pillar 4. The ineffable presence of the void. The final pillar is the ineffable gap. We can use fMRI to map how your brain reacts to different rooms, or EEG to track your arousal in a forest versus a factory. These tools are essential. They anchor our work in empirical observation, but they do not exhaust the qualia of the space. There is a structural gap between the measurement of a room's decibels and the feeling of being held by a sanctuary. Science can track your hormonal correlates in a cathedral, but it cannot capture the felt quality of belonging to a silence that is centuries old. Meaning in architecture, as in language, is always more than its symbolic meaning or empirical analysis. Reflective arrival. Take a slow breath. Notice the somatic blueprint of the room you are currently inhabiting. Does your heart recognize the idea that this room carries a charge? Do you feel the embodied syntax of the furniture or the lighting? Do you feel the ineffable presence in the silence between my sentences as they bounce off your walls? This is the quintessential mirror expanded to the world. It is the understanding that your environment is not just where you are. It is a physiological ecology you are in conversation with. Every time you enter a room, you are not just walking into a space. You are touching another nervous system at a distance, the nervous system of the architect, the history, and the field. The mirror has scaled from the person to the place. And once we understand how the room speaks, we can ask, what happens when the silence becomes the script? We have re-established the foundation in the stone. We have seen how the room functions as the caregiver. Now it is time to look at the field itself, the invisible web of history and intent that makes one room a sanctuary and another a cage. Field observation, scaling the environmental matrix. In our previous section, we re-anchored ourselves in the quintessential mirror. We acknowledged that to understand the matrix, we must return to the drop before we can grasp the ocean. We looked at how a room functions as a static caregiver, a physical entity that mirrors a state into your body before you've even had time to think. But now we must step back. Allow the lens to widen until the walls themselves begin to dissolve into a single breathing architecture. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, we define the field as the physiological ecology created by the space between us. In episode 1, we looked at how 10,000 people falling into a square creates a global autonomic state. But today we are looking at the field observation of the void. We are looking at how physical environments, independent of the people inside them, hold a tonal residue that entrains your nervous system into the resonance matrix. The leap from room to ecosystem. Imagine a single room, a bedroom. That is the dyad. It is clean, traceable, and direct. You know its first word. Now imagine an entire city. A network of corridors, streets, plazas, and tunnels. In MLH field theory, we propose that when we move through these environments, we aren't just moving through physical coordinates. We are moving through physiological zones. We are transitioning from one global autonomic state to another. If you walk from a quiet leafy park into a high-density glass and steel financial district, your body performs a field observation. You aren't just seeing buildings. You are sensing a shift in the ambient prosody. The park's prosody of safety, soft edges, organic rhythms, low-frequency hums, gives way to the district's prosody of the many sharp angles, high-frequency reflections, and a rhythmic pace that demands autonomic overdrive. The tonal residue of intent. What is the field? It is the lingering tonal charge left behind by the intentions of the architecture. In the MLH concept paper, I discussed how words are carriers of charge. Environments are the same. A space designed for surveillance, like a modern airport or an open-plan office, carries a different charge than a space designed for solitude. The field of efficiency. Notice the modern grocery store. The matrix here uses rhythmic primacy. The fluorescent lights hum at a specific frequency. The music is paced to keep you moving, but not rushing. The aisles are designed for a flight pace. This is engineered mirror linguistics applied to space. Your body isn't choosing to be hurried, it is being paced by the field's internal pacemaker. The field of compliance. Consider the waiting room of a government bureau. The institutional dialect here is one of dorsal vagal shutdown. The hard plastic chairs, the monotone walls, and the oppressive silence tell your nervous system. You are an object to be processed, not a body to be held. This is the architecture of silence performing a silent NSL script. The vagal superhighway of the city. To understand how we scale this, we look at the vagus nerve through the lens of the environment. In a crowd, the safety signal is rhythm. In an environment, the safety signal is symmetry and predictability. Our nervous systems evolved in nature, where acoustic coherence was found in the rustle of leaves or the flow of water. The resonance matrix of the modern city, however, often provides neuroceptive mismatches. We see the symmetry of a skyscraper, which our mind says is safe, but our body hears the sharpness of the wind whistling through the steel. Our vagal antenna is constantly scanning these fields for cues of life threat. When the environment provides too much tonal flattening, monotone concrete windowless rooms, we fall into a collective freeze. We become somatically groomed by the city to be compliant nodes. The invisible hands of the corridor. In the series Invisible Hands, we looked at how manipulation targets the body. In environmental linguistics, the most powerful invisible hand is the spatial prosody of the corridor. Corridors are transitional carrier waves. They are designed to move bodies from point A to point B. But notice the feel of a corridor in a luxury hotel versus a corridor in a public housing project. A hotel, soft carpets muffling the plosive strike of footsteps, warm lighting, low-frequency resonance, and a wide berth. It speaks the prosody of connection. A housing project, hard concrete amplifying every sound into a sympathetic spike, flickering fluorescent lights, and narrow pressing walls. It speaks the hardened syntax. By the time you reach the end of that corridor, your somatic lexicon has already been rewritten. You are either prepared for connection or prepared for defense. The architecture has conditioned your state before you've even seen a face. The qualitative weight of the static many. As we observe this scaling, we return to the ineffable gap. You can measure the lux of the lights or the decibels of the ventilation hum, but science cannot yet describe the feeling of a room being storied. This is the resonance matrix in its most raw historical form. Some spaces carry an ancestral resonance. A battlefield, even when empty and silent, carries a tonal residue of high sympathetic arousal that your body picks up through collective neuroception. You walk onto the field and your heart begins to race, not because of what you see, but because of the physiological monoculture that was once established there and never fully discharged. Refining the observation, the spatial audit. As you move through your week, perform a spatial field observation. The transit hub, walk into a train station. Notice the moment the acoustic architecture shifts. Feel the global pulse of the hurry. Are you a drop that is becoming the ocean of the rush? A library. Sit in a large library. Notice the architecture of silence. Is it a safety signal that allows for ventral vagal expansion? Or is it a clinical freeze that tells your body to hold its breath? We are not just individuals in a room. We are a co-regulatory ecology with our surroundings. And the word being spoken by the walls is the word your body is currently learning to mirror. The mirror has scaled from the crowd to the corridor. We have seen how the static many, the intent of the stone and steel, scripts our biology. Now, we move from the theory of the spatial field to the literal experience of it. State reflection. The anatomy of the field. We have felt the silence. We have walked the corridor. We have inhabited the institutional freeze of the waiting room. But now we must ask the question that sits at the core of the MLH research. Why? Why is a stone archway capable of slowing your pulse, while a fluorescent bulb can trigger a fight or flight response? Why does the human body so seamlessly surrender its sovereignty to the geometry of a room? To answer this, I must take you into the field theory. In the MLH concept paper, I propose that meaning is mirrored in physiology. Today, I am explicitly stating that in the resonance matrix, the environment is not a neutral container. It is a primary participant in the field. I propose that geometry is the prosody of the static field. The prosody of geometry, the architecture of the signal. In my foundational work on nervous system language, NSL, I define prosody as the music of language, a rhythm, pitch, and melody that tells the body whether it is safe. In the expansion of the mirror linguistic hypothesis, I have identified that physical shapes function as a visual and spatial voice. This is what I call the prosody of geometry. Ventral vagal geometry. Think of the dome, the arch, and the organic curve. I propose that these shapes mimic the prosody of safety we find in nature and in the soft contours of a caregiver's face. When you stand beneath a high vaulted ceiling, your eyes move in a wide rhythmic scan. This movement stimulates the ventral vagal branch of your vagus nerve, signaling that the environment is acoustically coherent. The architecture is effectively voicing a lullaby to your nervous system. Sympathetic geometry. Now consider the sharp angles, the glass, and the mirrored surfaces of a modern financial district. These are the spatial equivalents of a plosive strike. I propose that sharp angles act as a visual shout. They fragment your gaze and force your nervous system into a state of high variable scanning. Your amygdala detects these sharp edges as potential predatory signals, shifting your state into autonomic overdrive. Pulsal vagal geometry. This is the geometry of the clinical freeze. Low ceilings, windowless boxes, and monotone walls. I propose that these environments function as a tonal flattening of the space. They tell your body that expansion is impossible. This geometry scripts a state of dorsal vagal shutdown, the compliant collapse. I've observed in institutions designed for processing bodies rather than honoring them. The vagal antenna, measuring the field in the MLH concept paper, I noted that meaning is transmitted through mirrored autonomic states. To understand how the prosody of geometry lands in your tissue, we must look at the vagus nerve, specifically as a biological antenna. Your nervous system is constantly performing neuroception, a subconscious surveillance for safety and threat. When you enter a room, your vagus nerve is not just listening for sounds, it is listening to the frequency of the space. I propose that every room has a spatial frequency. A high-ceilinged room has a low-frequency resonance that allows for a slow heart rate. A cramped, cluttered room has a high-frequency jitter that encourages a rapid pulse. Because your nervous system is an open circuit, it attempts to match the frequency of the room. This is biofield entrainment at a spatial scale. You aren't choosing to feel small in a courtroom. Your vagus nerve is entrained to the linguistic command of the architecture, mirroring the static many. The myth of the individual in episode 1. I explored how 60,000 mirror neurons can fire in a massive synchronized chain during a crowd event. I now propose that we perform this same mass-scale simulation with the static many, the cumulative intent of the builders, and the histories held in the stone. Research in effective neuroscience suggests that our brains are constantly running internal models of our environment. When you stand in a cathedral, you aren't just mirroring the people around you. You are mirroring the physiological monoculture established by the architecture itself. The stone acts as a carrier of charge, holding the tonal residue of every nervous system that has ever bowed, wept, or sang within those walls. This is why the field is more than just a collection of people. It is the physiological ecology created by the intersection of your body and the space. I propose that the prosody of geometry is the primary regulator of the collective field. It is the invisible hand that ensures everybody in the room is in the same autonomic phase before a single word of the script is read. The ineffable gap in the stone. I return to the ineffable gap, the recognition that science can measure the pulse, but not the resonance. We can use EEG to track how your brainwaves synchronize with the acoustic coherence of a room. We can measure the spikes in oxytocin that occur when we sit in a ventral vagal geometry. But these tools do not exhaust the qualia of the void. There is a structural gap between the decibel level of a sanctuary and the feeling of being carried by its silence. I treat this gap as the defining feature of our interaction with the world. Meaning is always more than its measurement. The meaning of a sacred space is not the architecture. It is the ineffable resonance that happens when your tonal blueprint finds a match in the silence. The threshold of awareness. As I reflect on this anatomy, I see that the resonance matrix is an infrastructure we inhabit. Your nervous system was designed to be open, porous, and entrained by the world around it. The architecture of silence is simply the most permanent expression of the same mirror linguistic. Truth identified in a nursery. We are built to be regulated by the voices, human or spatial, that surround us. But as I have argued in the inversiverse, this entrainment makes us vulnerable. To be aware of the anatomy of the field is to begin to regain your sovereignty. When you understand why your breath catches in that hospital corridor, or why your heart expands in that forest, you are no longer just a node. You are an observer of the matrix. You are becoming a regulated anchor who understands that the word being spoken by the walls is a signal, not a command. The anatomy is clear, biology is ancient. The prosody of geometry is the silent music that scripts our lives. But how do we decode the specific institutional dialects that are designed to keep us in a state of compliant collapse? Lexicon Lab, decoding the environmental script. If the previous sections were the heart and the anatomy of our journey into the architecture of silence, this is the operating room. This is where I take the silence of our daily environments and put it under the microscope to see exactly how it is composed. In the foundational work of the Mirror Linguistic Hypothesis, MLH, I developed the concept of nervous system language, NSL. I defined it as a conscious grammar for co-regulation, a way to speak that honors the physiological state of the listener. But in the resonance matrix, I have observed that NSL is often used unconsciously or strategically by our physical environments to achieve collective entrainment. Today, I'm going to decode the specific master scripts of the rooms you inhabit every day. I propose that our environments are not passive backdrops. They are active speakers that use phonetic weaponry, rhythmic anchors, and spatial carrier words to bypass your critical thinking and speak directly to your brainstem. Phonetic weaponry in the built environment. In the lexicon lab, I don't start with what a room means, I start with its acoustics. In the field of environmental linguistics, the matrix uses specific phonetic structures to trigger immediate autonomic shifts. The plosive strike, the hardened hallway. Think of the sound of a closing locker, a heavy door, or a footstep on polished concrete. These are plosive strikes, sharp stop sounds followed by a sudden release. When these sounds are amplified by hard materials like brick or tile, they function as sympathetic spikes. I propose that a hallway designed with these acoustics is shouting at your nervous system. It keeps you in a state of high arousal vigilance. The sibilant hiss, the venting matrix. Notice the constant high-frequency sound of industrial air filtration or the white noise of an open-plan office. This is a sibilant strike. It mimics the sound of escaping steam or a predator's hiss. I have identified that this frequency keeps the human nervous system in a state of high variable scanning, preventing the vagus nerve from reaching a state of true rest. The long vowel hush. Conversely, notice the acoustic dampening of a carpeted library or a bedroom with heavy drapes. These spaces utilize open, resonant frequencies that allow for a continuous flow of air. This is vagal grounding at a spatial scale. The architecture is using these sounds to pull your nervous system into a state of ventral vagal safety. The school system, the industrial blueprint of compliance. I want to use the school system as a primary example of how the resonance matrix scripts biology from an early age. The school is perhaps the most aggressive static caregiver in our society. The bell as a sympathetic spike. I propose that the school bell is the ultimate plosive strike in a child's development. It is a high decibel, high frequency command that triggers an immediate sympathetic spike. It teaches the nervous system that its internal rhythm is secondary to the global pulse of the institution. Somatic misattunement in the classroom. Notice the rows of hard plastic seats, wooden desks. This is prosody of geometry used for regulation. I propose that these rows act as a linear script telling the body to stay rigid and forward-facing. The hard material of the chair is a somatic command to suppress the body's natural vocal jitter or movement. Over the years, this creates an institutional dialect of compliant collapse or dorsal vagal shutdown. The principal's office as a vagal hijacker. Certain rooms in a school function as spatial carrier words. The principal's office carries an inherited tonal charge of correction and life-threatening nervous system cycles. Long before a student enters the room, their body has already matched the ancestral charge of the space. The spatial carrier word, imprinting the void in the MLH concept paper, I established that words are carriers of physiological charge. In the resonance matrix, environments use spatial carrier words, objects or design elements that carry an inherited tonal charge. The bench and the gavel. In a courtroom, these are vagal hijackers. They represent the hardened syntax of the law. When you see them, your nervous system experiences a mirrored autonomic peak, a surge of adrenaline, before a single legal word is spoken. The fluorescent light. I propose that the specific flicker of fluorescent lighting acts as a trigger signal in hospitals and offices. It mimics the tonal flattening of a clinical freeze. It is a bridge that allows the institution to download a state of compliance directly into your being. Engineered spatial mirror linguistics, everyday application. How does this apply to your everyday life? Notice the spaces where you feel your ineffable gap disappearing. The supermarket rhythmic primacy. The layout of a modern grocery store is designed to achieve acoustic coherence with your walking pace. The tile floors amplifying sound versus the carpeted sections, dampening sound, are used to pace your movements. I propose that your body isn't choosing to hurry, it is being entrained by the floor. The open plan office, acoustic flooding. I have observed that open plan offices are sites of somatic misattunement. The lack of private acoustic architecture means your mirror neurons are constantly firing in response to every conversation around you. This leads to autonomic overdrive, where you are somatically groomed to be constantly available and never anchored. The home audit. Look at your own living space. Is your bedroom a vagal anchor? Or does it contain the tonal residue of your workspace? If you work from your home, you are charging that space with the sympathetic arousal of your job, turning a sanctuary into a field of stress. The grammar of the other in architecture, we analyze how the matrix uses space to sever resonance. When a building is designed for collective fight or dehumanization, the spatial language shifts into the hardened syntax. Categorization over presence. Using plexiglass barriers or segregated waiting zones tells your nervous system, do not mirror this. Somatic misattunement. By shifting the NSL of the space, using uncomfortable furniture, monotone colors, and sharp lighting, the matrix effectively turns off the mirror neurons, allowing for mass-scale efficiency without the interference of empathy. Identifying the environmental hijack. Diagnostic signs. How do you know when your lexicon has been hijacked by the matrix? Here are the diagnostic signs I've identified, the we without an I. You find just using words or slogans, or taking on a mood that you haven't personally interrogated. Tonal mimicry of space. You notice your own voice changing its pitch or rhythm to match the building, whispering in a frozen room or raised voices in a sharp one. Somatic certainty. You feel a hardening in your chest or throat the moment you cross a certain threshold. Reclaiming the spatial lexicon. The goal of the lexicon lab is to learn how to break these spatial spells. When you identify a carrier word or a prosodic trigger in a room, name it. When you feel the rhythmic entrainment of a building, break the beat. Take a breath that is out of sync with the room's ventilation. Move your body in a way that doesn't match the global pulse of the floor. By introducing dissonance into the field, you reclaim your sovereignty. You become a regulated anchor whose state is governed by your own tonal blueprint, not the engineered geometry of the matrix. We have decoded the signals. We have identified the weaponry of the school, the office, and the store. We see how the matrix uses the very air in these rooms to script our biology. Now, the weight of this awareness needs to settle. Amatic pause. The de-entrainment of the corridor. We have moved through the hardened syntax of the institution. We have decoded the phonetic weaponry that the school system and the hospital use to script your nervous system into a state of compliant collapse. We have looked at how geometry itself acts as the primary vocal signal in the resonance matrix, pulsing us into a state of dorsal vagal shutdown before a single word of the script is ever read. But here is the danger of information without integration. It becomes just another acoustic overload. Right now, as you process the reality that the walls around you are participating in a silent NSL script, your prefrontal cortex is likely working in autonomic overdrive. Your system is upregulated. You are informed, but are you anchored? It is time to cross the threshold. In my original framework of the mirror linguistic hypothesis, I propose that we are resonators before we are thinkers. If you are to survive the architecture of silence, you must learn the art of de-entrainment. You must learn to wipe the environmental mirror clean. This is the somatic pause, the philosophy of the spatial zero point. In MLH field theory, I define the 0 point as the only space where the mirror of the environment can be neutralized. In a world built on industrial hums and clinical freezes, silence is often treated as a void to be filled. But I propose that silence is the sovereign gateway. When you stand in an institution, your vagal antenna is pulled outward. You are scanning the acoustic architecture for cues of safety or life threat. This is what I call extroverted physiology. You are mirroring the state of the room. The somatic pause is the shift to introverted physiology. It is the moment you tell your nervous system, the building is over there, my body is here. It is the reclamation of the ineffable gap, the private, unmeasurable space where you are not a node in the matrix, but a sovereign being. The first anchor, the diaphragm versus the institutional script. I want you to bring your attention to your diaphragm. In the resonance matrix, the architecture dictates your breathing. In the clinical freeze of a hospital, your breath becomes shallow and high, mirroring the tonal flattening of the lights. In the hardened syntax of a school hallway, your breath is held and pressurized, matching the plosive strike of the lockers. To de-entrain from the room, you must reclaim the engine. Close your eyes, place a hand on your belly. As you breathe in, feel that dome drop. Feel the expansion not just in your chest, but in your lower back, your sides, your seat. This is vagal grounding. By consciously slowing your breath, you are sending a signal to your brainstem that the institutional dialect no longer governs your physiology. You are creating acoustic dissonance with the walls. You are telling the room, I refuse your rhythm. The second anchor, resonant thawing of the freeze now. Let's return to the borderland of the throat. The larynx is the gateway to the matrix. In the lexicon lab, we discussed how institutions use monotone and tonal flattening to signal authority without intimacy. They want your voice to be as flat as the concrete walls. We are going to thaw the institutional freeze using internal mirroring. Take a breath, and on the exhale, make a low, steady sound. A hum. Notice the vibration in your lips, your teeth, and deep in your chest. You are using your own voice to vibrate your own vagus nerve. You are talking back to your nervous system in the language of frequency, the only language the matrix cannot bypass. In this hum, the tonal residue of the school bells, the fluorescent flicker, and the sterile hallways begin to shake loose. You are vibrating the inherited tonal charge out of your tissue. You are becoming a clean mirror once again. The third anchor, grounding the static charge, finally, feel your feet. The matrix travels through the air. It lives in the acoustic architecture, the digital pings, and the spatial spells. But the earth is the ultimate regulator. Imagine your nervous system is like a lightning rod. Throughout this episode, you have been absorbing the static of the environmental field. You have been electrified by the prosody of geometry found in our hospitals and courtrooms. Use this pause to ground that electricity. As you exhale, imagine the charge of the institution, the pressure of the corridor, the weight of the judge's bench, traveling down your spine, through your legs, and into the floor. The earth can hold it. The earth doesn't mirror the matrix. The earth serves as a fundamental, pure grounding plane for both emotive and electrical charge. This function is analogous to how a TV aerial is grounded. The connection to the earth is not solely for structural support, but also to effectively discharge the electromagnetic waves produced by the radiating antenna. The threshold of integration. Stay in this stillness for a few more moments. Notice if the lump in your throat, that barricade of edited truths, has softened. Notice if your heart has found a pace that feels like home rather than the many. You are currently standing at the threshold of the many. You have the awareness of the field, but you have the anchor of the self. This is the ultimate goal of nervous system language, NSL, to move through the matrix without being overwritten by it. In my work on invisible hands, I said that the goal isn't to spot monsters everywhere, it's to stop abandoning yourself. The somatic pause is where you stop abandoning yourself. It is where you remind your body that even in the center of the most sterile institution, there is a first word that belongs only to you. The return to the field. When you are ready, gently open your eyes if they were closed from using your imagination to visualize. Do not rush back into the thinking state. Carry this 0 point with you as we move into the final sections of our journey. You have integrated the frequency. You have cleared the mirror. Now we are ready to look at how we can return to the architecture, not as a passive node waiting to be scripted, but as a regulated anchor. We have breathed. We have hummed. We have grounded. The architecture of silence is still out there, but now you have a rhythm of your own to match it against. The pulse of the crowd was the roar. The architecture of silence is the cage, but the reframe spectrum is the key. The reframe spectrum, recalibrating the architecture, having guided ourselves through the de-entrainment of the corridor and examined and demonstrated how to clear the environmental mirror, we have effectively grounded the institution's static charge. However, as established in the foundational mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, silence is a myth. We are situated within the matrix. To act as a regulated anchor within the architecture of silence, one must not merely avoid places like hospitals, courtrooms, or schools. Instead, the focus is on learning to occupy these hardened syntaxes without permitting them to corrupt or alter one's internal grammatical structure. This is the reframe spectrum. While episode 1 focused on the roar of the many, this spectrum is specifically designed for the prosody of geometry and the tonal residue of space. It is a series of linguistic and somatic maneuvers that allow you to introduce a safety signal into an environment built for threat or compliance. The first spectrum, internal spatial reframing. Before you can speak a single word into the field, you must reframe the mirror inside yourself. In an institution, your neuroception is constantly scanning for authority and threat. The trap occurs when your mind enters a sterile lobby and says, I am small, I am in trouble, I must be quiet. This is the institutional hijack, which triggers dorsal vagal shutdown before you even speak. The NSL reframe requires you to speak internally to your own nervous system. I am standing in a prosody of geometry designed for efficiency. My shallow breath is a mirror of the low ceilings, not a reflection of my worth. This is a spatial script, not a personal prophecy. By reframing the experience from a moral story to a biological observation, you create the first layer of the ineffable gap. You acknowledge the mirror without becoming the reflection. The second spectrum, breaking the tonal mimicry of space. As I decoded in the lexicon lab, architecture uses tonal mimicry to bind you into its field. You find yourself whispering in a library or holding your breath in a courtroom, not out of respect, but out of a somatic command and the high-frequency silence. To break this, you must practice acoustic dissonance. If the space is clinical, high-pitched, shadowless and flat, your reframe is to intentionally speak low, slow and resonant. In a hardened syntax corridor, or when someone speaks to you with the precision trigger of institutional anger, your body's impulse is to match their pitch. Instead, I want you to drop your voice by half an octave and lengthen your vowels. You must use your voice to vibrate your own vagus nerve even while you are speaking to the person behind the plexiglass. You aren't just being calm, you are introducing a vagal anchor into the field. By refusing to match the sharpness of the room, you make it physiologically harder for the matrix to keep you in a state of high arousal vigilance. You are hacking the matrix through somatic integrity. The third spectrum, the object discharge in environmental linguistics. Certain objects act as vagal hijackers, the judge's bench, the fluorescent flicker, or the principal's door. These carry an inherited tonal charge. I propose a reframe strategy I call definitional grounding. For example, if you are in a courtroom or any institutional building, and your body feels the plosive strike of the judge entering, you must tell your nervous system, that bench is wood, that gavel is a tool, the authority I feel is a somatic imprinting of the room's geometry. I return to the definition. By mentally stripping the tonal charge from the object, and looking at it as a mere symbol again, you invert the manipulation. You take the battery out of the environment, metaphorically speaking. Navigating the three institutional dialects. We have identified three primary dialects of the matrix that require specific anchor responses to maintain sovereignty. First, consider the clinical freeze. This is the state of hospitals and laboratories, monotone, shadowless, and sterile. When you find yourself in this environment, your reframe must involve melodic inflection. By adding a slight musicality or lilt to your voice in a frozen room, you signal to other nervous systems that it is safe to thaw. You are using linguistic warmth as a de-icer for the field. Second, we encountered industrial hurry. This is the dialect of grocery stores, transit hubs, and school hallways, fast, high decibel, and sharp-angled. To counter this, you must adopt the prosody of presence to speak with a falling cadence that signals certainty and groundedness. Intentionally walk 20% slower than the global pulse of the floor, forcing the environment to adjust to your rhythm rather than the other way around. Third, we find bureaucratic stasis. This is the dialect of low-ceilinged, windowless offices and courtrooms, rigid and suppressed. Your response here is the ventral vagal statement. You must say, either internally or aloud, I hear the intensity in the room. I am staying with my breath. This acknowledges the field state without joining its compliant collapse. The acoustic shield, the language of boundaries. In my work on the Inversiverse, I explored how the world is built to keep you asleep. In the architecture of silence, sleep is the trance of somatic grooming. Your acoustic shield is the use of boundary setting NSL. Adopt the internal mantra, I am not available for this frequency. You do not always have to say these words out loud, you say them somatically. Adjust your posture, settle your weight, and voice your boundary through the prosody of finality. When you speak from a state of acoustic coherence, where your internal no matches your external tone, you create a neuroceptive barrier. Manipulators and engineered environments struggle to find a grip on a somatically congruent person. You become Socratically untouchable. The sovereign voice, rescripting the void finally. Once you are regulated and have reframed the charge, you can speak into the matrix to shift it. This is the capability of the mirror linguistic hypothesis to change local cultures. The practice here is prosodic reframing. You take a triggering word or a tense spatial situation, like a rigid classroom or a stagnant meeting, and you revoice it. You speak the truth of the moment with a tone of ventral vagal invitation. For example, you might say, I notice we are all very loud right now. I wonder what happens if we take a breath. In that one sentence, you have named the field state, introduced a somatic pause, and used melodic prosody to invite safety. You have used the matrix to heal the matrix. Being a regulated anchor is exhausting. It requires you to go against the evolutionary tide of the many. But as I argued in moral and ethical inversions, staying regulated is a revolutionary act. By refusing to join the collective dysregulation of the institution, you become a biological North Star for everyone else in the field. Integration prompt. Becoming the anchor in the void. We have reached the point where the map must be traded for the terrain. We have spent this hour decoding the architecture of silence and the silent nervous system language, NSL, of our institutions. But we must acknowledge a fundamental truth of the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH. Integration is not a theory, it is a repetition. We can map the neurobiology of a courtroom and decode the prosody of geometry in a hospital corridor. But if we simply turn off this recording and walk back into those spaces as passive nodes, we have only added to the acoustic overload. We have observed through my research that while I may have identified these tonal blueprints, you are the one who must rewrite them. We do this by speaking safety back into our own stories through the very way we move, breathe, and exist within the environment. Today I'm inviting you into a set of spatial fieldwork assignments. These are not academic hurdles to pass, but experiments in sovereign regulation. They are the tools we use to remain a regulated anchor in a world designed to keep us somatically groomed for compliance. Fieldwork, the geometric audit, passive observation. Between now and our next exploration, perform an ambient audit of the fields we inhabit. Choose one specific institutional space this week, perhaps a local school, a transit hub, or a medical clinic. Once you are there, practice the linguistic scan. For the first 5 minutes, we are going to ignore the words. Treat the signs and the conversations as a foreign dialect. Instead, we are going to listen to the prosody of the architecture. Ask yourself, is the song of this room rising in pitch? Is it heavy and monotone? Does the geometry feel sharp and staccato like a fight state? Then, track the mirror. Notice what your body is doing in response to the room. Are your shoulders lifting toward your ears? Is your breath becoming shallow and rhythmic as you entrain to the industrial hum of the ventilation? We must simply notice how the resonance matrix is attempting to write its institutional state directly onto our nervous systems. A rhythmic break, reclaiming the corridor, active dissonance. Once we have identified the global pulse of the field, we move from observation to active agency. This is where we practice breaking the beat. If you find yourself in a hurried environment, like a school hallway or a busy supermarket, where everyone is moving at a frantic flight pace, I want you to find your own tempo. Intentionally walk 20% slower than the crowd. Feel the resistance in your fascia as you refuse the rhythmic primacy of the floor. When you must speak, perhaps to order a coffee or ask for directions, do so with a falling cadence. Speak with a tone of grounded finality. Then observe the ripple. Does the person serving you slow down in response? Does the acoustic coherence of the immediate 5-foot radius around you shift? This is the MLH in action. By refusing to mirror the dysregulated field, we are introducing a safety signal into the matrix. We are testing the hypothesis that one regulated body can influence the entire field. The somatic journal, decoding the first word when you return to your own 0 point, your home, sit with a pen or a voice recorder. We must move past the thinking brain and speak directly from the body brain. Ask yourself 3 specific questions. What was the spatial carrier word that hit me hardest today? Was it the judge's bench? The principal's door? The sterile smell of the clinic? Don't analyze the meaning. Describe the charge. Where did it land in your body? Did it close your throat or sink your stomach? Where did I abandon my own resonance to fit the field? Did you find yourself using a compliance tone or a fawn response to appease the clinical freeze of the institution? Did you join the collective hurry just to avoid the social rejection circuitry of the matrix? What phrase could I speak right now that would make my body exhale? Is it I have time? Is it no? Is it I am here? Say it out loud in the quiet of your room and listen to your own resonance. That is your new first word. Finally, I want you to find one moment this week where you experienced the ineffable gap inside a hardened syntax. Find a moment where you are moved, perhaps by a piece of music you hear through your headphones while walking through a transit hub, or a moment of genuine connection with another individual in a rigid office. In that moment, notice that science can't touch what you are feeling. Your heart rate might be high, your cortisol might be flowing, but the quality of that resonance belongs only to you. Hold that feeling. That is your sovereignty. That is the part of you that the matrix can never fully own. Navigating the biological backlash. As we do this fieldwork, we will feel resistance. Our nervous systems have been somatically groomed for decades to prioritize belonging over autonomy in these institutional spaces. When we choose not to entrain, when we walk slower or breathe deeper in a monotone room, we may feel a spike of survival anxiety. That is the work. Our bodies are learning a new dialect. We are learning that it is safe to have our own rhythm. We are learning that we are no longer children who must mirror the caregiver's institutional freeze to survive. We are adults who can mirror the truth to thrive. We have the map, we have the tools, we have awareness. But the resonance matrix is a living entity, and it will attempt to re-script us the moment we stop paying attention. Be vigilant, be anchored, be the acoustic dissonance the world needs. The resonance return. We have reached the final threshold of this second movement. We have stood at the center of the mirror linguistic hypothesis and watched as the reflection expanded, moving from the human drop of the dyad to the ocean, of the crowd, and finally to the stone of the architecture of silence. Take a moment now to truly notice the air in the room where you sit. Notice the state of your body against the chair, or where you are sitting or lying down, the depth of your pulse in your wrists, and the weight of the silence between breaths. We are no longer the same nodes that began this episode. We have informed ourselves not just by data, but by frequency. We have learned that the silence around us is never empty. It is a language that has been speaking to us since before we had the names to describe it. The synthesis, mapping the environmental matrix. In this exploration, we have done more than study architectural theory. we have mapped the invisible, dramatic scripts of our daily lives. We began by re-establishing the quintessential mirror, the radical truth that meaning is a physiological event. We stripped away the illusion that a room is a neutral container and looked instead at the prosody of geometry. We acknowledged that your nervous system was spoken into existence by the spaces you inhabited long before you understood a single noun. We remembered that you inherited a somatic lexicon from the first sterile hallway you walked through and the first high-ceilinged room that invited you to look up. Then we scaled the mirror. We stepped into field theory and looked at the architecture of silence. We saw how the individual I is often an island that gets subsumed by the institutional dialect of the building. We walked through the clinical hospital corridor at dusk and felt the visceral reality of entrainment, that moment when your breathing stops being yours and starts belonging to the ventilation hum. In the anatomy of the field, we looked at the clinical hardware of the body, the mirror neurons, and the vagal antennae that make us so porous to the frequencies of our surroundings. We realized that our biology is not a closed circuit but a co-regulatory ecology. We entered the lexicon lab to decode the master scripts of the matrix, identifying the plosive strike of the school bell and the vagal hijackers found in our courtrooms. We saw how the matrix uses engineered mirror linguistics to bypass our critical minds and script our bodies into a state of compliant collapse. Finally, we practiced the sovereignty of the pause. We utilized the reframe spectrum, the tools we need to move from being passive nodes to becoming regulated anchors. We learned that by introducing acoustic dissonance and reclaiming our own rhythm, we don't just save ourselves, we offer a safety signal back to the very stone that attempts to silence us. The somatic ethics of inhabitation, but we must go deeper. We must ask, what are the ethics of inhabiting a room that does not want us to be whole? In my research on moral and ethical inversions, I have often argued that staying regulated is the revolutionary act. The environment is attempting to sever our resonance with our own humanity. It is attempting to turn us into concepts rather than bodies. To be a regulated anchor in these spaces is an act of somatic resistance. We must realize that every time we choose to take a ventral vagal breath in a room designed for dorsal vagal shutdown, we are performing a mirror linguistic intervention. We are reclaiming the ineffable gap that the matrix tries to close. We are refusing the institutional freeze and choosing instead to be Socratically untouchable. Archetypes of the void, the library, the terminal, the home. As we prepare to leave this episode, let us look at 3 unique environmental archetypes we have not yet fully decoded, but which illustrate the vastness of the resonance matrix. The library, the anchor of the ancestors. Notice the specific quality of silence in an old library. It is not the clinical freeze of the hospital. It is a silence that feels stacked with the tonal residue of 1,000,000 written words. I propose that this is a ventral vagal field of curiosity. High shelves and soft carpets create an acoustic coherence that tells your nervous system it is safe to scan, to learn, and to be moved. The terminal, the liminal script, consider the airport or the train station. These are transitional field states. They are designed for industrial hurry. The global pulse of the terminal is one of flight. Notice how your body feels homeless in these spaces. The matrix here uses rhythmic primacy to keep you in a state of constant shallow breathing transit. To be an anchor in a terminal is to be the only still point in a rushing world. Home, the first word. Finally, we must look at the bedroom. This should be the ultimate 0 point. But so often, we bring the tonal residue of the office or the school into our sanctuaries. We allow the silicon mirror of our devices to script our sleep. I invite you to audit your home. Is your bedroom voicing safety, or is it echoing the hardened syntax of your productivity? The ineffable conclusion, beyond the measurement. As we wrap this second movement, we must return to the ineffable gap. Throughout this episode, we have examined labels, prosody of geometry, tonal residue, and NSL. But as I have stated, labels are just fingers pointing at the moon. The true depth of what we have explored today lies in the qualia of your own experience. It is the feeling of your jaw loosening as you step out of a rigid meeting. It is the sudden clarity you feel when you realize that your exhaustion in a shopping mall wasn't a personal flaw, but a biological mirror of the acoustic overload in the room. The mirror linguistic hypothesis reminds us that while science can measure the pulse and the decibel, it cannot capture the meaning of the resonance. That meaning belongs to you. It is the private, sacred space within the matrix where your first word is still being whispered. A look ahead, ancestral resonance, but the walls are only one layer of the matrix. The tonal residue isn't just held in stone, it is held in our bodies of being. In the next episode, Ancestral Resonance, we will move from the static many of the architecture to the genetic many of our lineage. We will explore how the survival dialects of our predecessors, their cries, their silences, and their first words are encoded in our DNA. We will ask, How does the tonal charge of a trauma 3 generations old still speak through your voice today? What happens when the resonance matrix is not a building, but a bloodline? And how can we apply nervous system language to the ghosts of our family lexicon to find a new first word for the future? We will explore and examine that we are not just standing in a room, we are standing in history. The sovereign exit. You are a resonator in a world of echoes. To live in the resonance matrix is to understand that your voice is a gift of frequency, and your ear is a gateway to the soul of the many. As you walk out from this frequency and back into the noise of knowing, do not be afraid of the entrainment. Do not fear the mirrors, simply notice them. Be the anchor that refuses the plosive strike of the storm. Be the breath that remembers the 0 point when the room begins to scream. Be the inversion of the field, the one who speaks safety where there is threat, and presence where there is absence. Your physiology is your greatest asset. Your tone is your most profound legacy. And your awareness is the only bridge across the ineffable gap that leads us back to one another. Carry the frequency, trust the signal, and always, always listen for the resonance beneath the words. Until next time, you've been listening to The Resonance Matrix. I'm James Miller.